Elena Kovaleva, a 30-year-old wildlife photographer, settled in a secluded wooden hut on the edge of the Serengeti National Park in Tanzania. Her days began with tea on the spacious veranda, where she watched the savanna awaken, camera at the ready. In early August, after the first monsoon rains had revived the grass, Elena noticed a lioness. She appeared at the edge of a clearing, her golden coat with dark spots blending in with the acacia bushes. Elena froze, afraid of scaring away her guest, and took a few pictures. The lioness carefully surveyed her surroundings, her amber eyes sparkling with intelligence and alertness, before disappearing into the shade of the trees. Lions rarely approach human dwellings, and this appearance was unusual. In the following days, the lioness returned at dawn, always keeping a safe distance. Elena began to notice details. The lioness came out of the same section of the forest, sniffed the wind, her ears reacting to the slightest sound. Through her telephoto lens, Elena could see that the lioness was thin, probably due to competition from larger prides, against the rules for dealing with wild animals. But following her heart, Elena began leaving small portions of meat from antelopes that had died of natural causes at the edge of the clearing. She placed the food far enough away so as not to scare the lioness, but close enough to watch from the porch. The first portions disappeared at night, probably taken away by jackals or hyenas. But on the fifth morning, Elena saw the lioness cautiously approach the meat, sniff it, and quickly eat it before retreating into the forest. Feeding became part of Elena's morning ritual. She was careful not to overfeed, only supplementing the lioness's natural diet. Elena studied literature on lions and corresponded with a biologist from the University of Dar es Salaam to ensure that her actions were ethical. Sometimes she left food, sometimes she didn't, never trying to approach the lioness or lure her closer to the hut. Their relationship was based on mutual respect. By October, when the rains intensified and the savanna blossomed with bright greenery, the lioness began to appear more often. Elena noticed changes. The lioness stayed longer in the clearing, sometimes basking in the morning sun after eating. Once, she even stayed when Elena came out onto the porch, just looking at her with her piercing eyes before leaving. In conversations with her brother on the phone, Elena shared stories about the lioness. Her brother was concerned for her safety, but Elena emphasized that this was not a pet, but a wild creature that she was observing from a distance. Soon Elena discovered the tracks of 2 cubs next to the lioness's tracks in the wet soil. This discovery increased her respect for the mother, who, despite accepting food, remained vigilant and hid her cubs. In December, heavy rains flooded the region. Elena did not leave her hut for 3 days, worrying about the lioness and her cubs, hoping that they had found shelter. When the storm subsided, Elena made her way through the mud to leave food in a small shelter she had built to protect it from the rain. The next morning, she found the lioness's tracks, but no small prints. This was alarming. Where had the cubs gone? The next morning, a strange sound from the veranda made Elena prick up her ears. It wasn't the usual noise of the savanna, but a deliberate scraping movement. Looking out of the window, she froze. A lioness was standing on the wooden veranda, something she had never done before. 2 lion cubs lay at her feet. One, covered in mud, was motionless, its hind leg twisted unnaturally, and the fur around the wound caked with blood. The second cub moved weakly, licking its brother. The lioness looked at Elena through the window, her eyes seeming to beg for help, then retreated to the edge of the porch, not leaving, but keeping her distance. Elena realized that the lioness had entrusted her cub to her. Her heart ached at the realization of this act of trust. She called Dr. Hassan Monet, a veterinarian from the reserve. He confirmed that such behavior was unprecedented and advised her to act quickly. Putting on thick gloves, taking a soft blanket and a carrier, Elena slowly walked out onto the veranda. The lioness tensed, growling softly, but did not attack, watching as Elena approached the injured cub. With trembling hands, she wrapped the baby in the blanket. He did not resist, his breathing was weak. The lioness let out a heart-wrenching sound but remained in place while Elena retreated into the hut with the carrier. The road to the Serengeti Wildlife Rehabilitation Center took 3 hours on muddy roads. Elena whispered encouragingly to the lion cub, naming him Tano and begging him to hang on. At the center, veterinarians immediately took Tano for an examination. He was diagnosed with a complex hip fracture, hypothermia, and exhaustion. After the operation, the doctors reported that Tano was strong and likely to survive, but his return to the wild was questionable due to prolonged treatment and contact with humans. Elena spent weeks between the hut and the center, monitoring Tano's recovery. His paw healed in a cast, and he gained weight thanks to a special diet. The center's staff used methods to minimize his habituation to humans. They fed him through special devices, limited contact, and introduced Tano to the sounds of the savanna. But by February, it became clear that Tano had become too accustomed to humans. Dr. Moini explained that the critical window for the development of wild instincts had passed, and that release into the wild was not possible. Elena applied to participate in the home rehabilitation program. She underwent intensive training, studying the behavior of lions, their diet, and their needs. On her property, she built a spacious enclosure with trees, rocks, and a small stream to make Tano feel comfortable. The lioness continued to visit the hut, sometimes sitting for a long time at the edge of the clearing, as if waiting for news. Elena talked to her from the porch, telling her about Tano, even though she knew that words meant nothing to the lioness. It helped her cope with her own emotions, gratitude for the trust placed in her, sadness at the impossibility of returning Tano to the wild, and hope for the best. In April, when the acacia trees began to bloom, the enclosure was ready. Elena took Tano home. He was now bigger, almost 6 months old, with a healed paw, only slightly different in coat color. At the center, they prepared him for the move. But the moment of release into the enclosure was tense. Dr. Moene opened the cage, and Tano, after hesitating, cautiously stepped out. He sniffed the space, explored the stream, first recoiling from the water, then boldly touching it with his paw. "He's accepting the space," the doctor said quietly, and Elena breathed a sigh of relief. In the days that followed, Elena strictly followed the protocols. She fed Tano through a system that excluded direct association with her, updated his toys, and monitored his health from a distance. The lioness appeared a week later at sunset. Instead of stopping at the edge of the clearing as usual, she headed for the enclosure. Elena watched from the porch, forgetting about the camera. The lioness walked around the enclosure and stopped at the fence. Tano, noticing his mother, came closer. They froze, looking at each other. After a long pause, the lioness sat down, and Tano repeated her pose. Elena felt tears welling up. It wasn't the reunion she had dreamed of, but it was meaningful nonetheless. The lioness began to visit regularly, sometimes approaching the enclosure, sometimes watching from a distance. She no longer stepped onto the porch, keeping a wild distance, but seemed to accept the conditions Elena had created. By midwinter, when Tano had grown older, the lioness's visits became less frequent, as is natural when cubs grow up. But she did not disappear. Elena's cameras sometimes caught her silhouette at the edge of the forest, sometimes with a new cub, as if showing it to Tano. Elena included the photos of the lioness and Tano in her new photo album, dedicated to the fragile balance between humans and nature. A simple gesture, leaving food for a hungry lioness, led to a connection that changed her life. The trust of a wild creature deepened her understanding of her place in the world and strengthened her determination to protect wildlife. Sometimes at dawn, Elena would see a golden shadow among the acacia trees, amber eyes fixed on the hut and the enclosure. It reminded her of the unbreakable bond forged in a moment of crisis, of her role as a guardian between wildness and human compassion. Friends, thank you for taking the time to read this story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to support us. See you in the next stories about wildlife.